So can you tell us a little bit about being life as a visa officer? Like, what do you do? Because, like, okay, so there's this, as you mentioned earlier, there's this black box, that
Right.
you know, in the visa application process, visa adjudication process that people don't know. So we just go in the embassy, we just see someone sitting behind a glass, and you
Mm-hmm.
and then you get a paper slip rejection, or
Mm-hmm.
you don't know whatever else happened between. So what's a typical life day to day for a visa?
Yeah. So I do have another former consular officer that consults with Udeti, and you can see on our YouTube channel we do some videos about Lagos and Abuja. So I called her up and I'm like, what was life for you in Nigeria? And I can tell you my perspective from India, but it wasn't that different. So in Nigeria and India, not that different. We both woke up at early morning and got to our visa window by 8 a.m. We had to do 120 applicants before 11:30 or noon. It used to be much higher. It used to be 150 applicants, and some posts would do super Saturdays, but then that changed. And so now it's about 120 applicants. And once you hit a certain number, you can sit down. So there is no quota for visa approval or denial, but there is a quota of how many applicants you have to hit a day. If I don't hit 120 applicants, my colleague has to pick up my slack. So we had to go fast. And that is something that probably sheds some light on the fast refusals and the lack of opportunity at the visa window. And then we would go to lunch, and after that we would do interview waiver cases and our back end work, which means checking our 221Gs. And it's a very high paced, high pressure, repetitive and challenging job. And we switch posts every 2 years. So especially a brand new consular officer may not know anything about Ghana or Nigeria, or in my case, when I first arrived in India, I'm like, wow, it's really hot. Like, so hot. No one told me it was going to be this hot. So it's kind of a challenge for the consular officer to get up to speed with the cultural norms. So they're facing a lot, and a lot of officers, start off young. Some are single, some have families. So there's a lot. It's a high pressure job.
There's this joke, like this visa. We have these visa jokes about a visa officer having a bad day, and so you want to pray that your visa officer doesn't have a bad day so that you get an acceptance. So how much does personal life of a visa officer affect how they adjudicate? Does that play? Is it like a myth, or is it, how much of it is? I'm sure it's not, like, definitely it doesn't, like, the mood does not affect everything they do, but like how much does that play into just going off a script a little bit?
I think the mood is a bit of a myth. However, I will say that if you make common mistakes, and we'll talk about those common mistakes, or you are perceived as lying, that might irritate the consular officer. So each consular officer has their rub. And if you rub them the wrong way, they could refuse you. If you use, hey, my mom had a medical issue, that's why I couldn't finish my bachelor's degree, and now I'm 23 and want to go get my bachelor's degree, they're going to be like, really? And you're going to kind of, for some consular officer, you might put them in a bad mood because they're trying to get to the bottom of it, but they're not able to. So there is a little bit of that at the visa window. I would also say there's biases at the visa window too that come into play. Maybe the way that an applicant looks, where he comes from, certain high fraud areas, for example, put the visa officer more on edge than other places. So I think that there are these nonverbal and inherent biases that every single consular officer comes in with. I'm a different nationality, I'm a different ethnicity than another consular officer. It's like, maybe I'm more sympathetic towards females who want to be educated in the United States, so I'm going to give you a little bit more of a chance. So that's real. We're human, so that is definitely real.
That's very interesting. So you've been a visa officer for so long. You've interacted with so many students trying to further their education. So what do you see about those students? What are the unique things you've noticed about students that have been to you, trying to get visa to go study abroad?
Sure. And I will caveat what I said earlier, that everybody tries to apply the law the same way. Are you sufficiently prepared to succeed in your studies? Are you a serious student, and can you fund your education? Do I think you're going to use your visa well? And so the biases come in as nuances to the application of the law, but every single consular officer is trying to apply the law, but because we're human, we have those nuances. So just to clarify that, I see a lot of Indian and Nigerian students and many other types of students from different places really struggle with their choices and plans. And a lot of them get advice from agents and are guided to the visa window and not necessarily getting there through their own research and critical thinking. Which I think if there is one thing that I want to communicate to everybody on this call. A visa approval starts the moment you start thinking about wanting to study in the United States. So that would be my advice to counter some of the issues at the window with the lack of clarity. If you were to take control of your life and say, I want to do my own research about this institution, talk to alumni, I would say even expand my circle, go to conferences, go to neighboring countries that don't require hard visas, really think about everything, that when you get to the visa window, you're really going to have that clarity of thought. So if you're really early in the process, that's an opportune place to be. But yes, the struggle is the same: lack of clarity, lack of direction, and taking advice from visa agents being the kind of worst culprits at the visa window.
You mentioned agents advising people wrongly, and of course students are anxious and they feel like they can't head into the war zone alone on their own, and so they trust their agent. But would you advise people, because would you advise people to go through agents because there are certain practices that are not advisable? As a visa officer, you'll see a student standing in front of you, this person probably went through an agent and advised them wrongly, and because of that now they're getting rejected, and probably you're not happy about that. How would you change that? How would you advise?
I work with education agents, not travel agents, but I work with education agents. I love the education agents that I work for. The issue comes when you are trusting somebody, and oftentimes you have these education agencies and then these agents that, have never been to the United States, have never heard of these schools, but the school is giving them X commission. And so they have marching orders to fill these seats. So I am concerned about the conflict of interest there. So use education agents, that's totally fine, but know what you want first. And then go to an education agent if you so choose. And then there's also solo practitioners that help you with your application. I've seen students use those solo practitioners that work on a fee versus the commission-based system. So just be aware of how these agents are getting paid and go to them with your own ideas in mind. Don't necessarily just take their advice at face value. And if you do take their advice for those universities, at least go back and do your own research and know why you are deciding to go with their decision for you, or take some of the options that they provided for you. So just be an educated consumer, just like with everything else. But this is the biggest decision of your life. So you need to be an educated consumer.
That's interesting. It's very, very insightful. Maybe a lot of people will get something from that. Not trusting agents, but finding the best people that would advise you accordingly. So let's talk about the visa application process. There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of misconceptions about the process, about a lot of information on the internet, a lot of visa experts giving advices and all that. So, what are the common misconceptions you've perceived from students coming to you to get visas? You know?
So I think that students think that there's one correct answer. So I think Nigerian applicants will tell you a lot at the window and hope that they hit the nail on the head. And Indian applicants, man, their memorization skills are just unmatched. I can't believe what they're able to memorize. They'll just stick with the script, and no matter how much you try to shake them, they're gonna be like, no, this is the right answer. So people think that there's a correct answer. There isn't. You have to be a whole person. You're not going through a paper-based process. You are talking to a human. So if you can convince your auntie that you're going to finish your course in the United States, be able to pay off your loan, come back to your home country and be successful, then you could probably pretty close to convince a visa officer, right? There is this piecemealing idea. If I just put this and this and this together and find out all this stuff on the internet, then I'll succeed. I'll give you an example. This is not an F-1 applicant, but this is a client where he thought that if I just travel to these European countries and go for my B1, B2 visa, then I'm going to be able to convince the consular officer to issue me a visa. That kind of thinking really neglects the bigger picture. We want everything to make sense. Your purpose of travel has to make sense. So even if you're very wealthy, if your purpose of travel doesn't make sense, your choices for what you want to do in the United States don't make sense, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a visa. And just because you're not financially as well off as somebody else doesn't mean that you are going to fail the visa interview. So consular officers look you as a whole person, and the misconception is that you can somehow piecemeal and game the system.
There's this, I don't know if it's a misconception. I want you to confirm if it's a misconception or not. So it's a common saying that visa officers are psychologists because they can read you and therefore they're able to know whether you're lying or not. Are you a psychologist, Yvette?
That's so funny. You know, there's this guy on YouTube who's a former CIA agent, and they put him, I don't know, they put him through like all this weird stuff. Like they make him live in this house and do these testings. I mean, I wish I got that kind of training. I didn't. You know, consular officers are put into a class called ConGen for 2 weeks. We're taught the law, which is, most of it is Googleable. Like you can Google it. 9FAM, you know, it's the policy that drives visa education. We pass a test. We get put in a brand new country, and we get told adjudicate visas based on these parameters. We're not psychologists, but after so many interviews, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 interviews, you create efficiencies in your mind, and you create profiles of people, which is good for efficiency and a necessary evil for you to move forward in the numbers you need to hit, but bad for applicants who may look like somebody that comes from a place of fraud, for example, or does not look as well off, but they have a story behind them. And if that person does not communicate that story, you have put them into a bucket, because after so mmany adjudications, you start to just place people in buckets. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sometimes I think they're psychics as well. Just, but that's interesting to know. So let's say someone has an interview next week or next month at the embassy, and you would advise them. So what are the common reasons for visa refusals, and how can someone who has an interview overcome them and do better at the embassy?
So common reasons would be rehearsed speech or over explaining, generic answers, not being truthful. I would say no connection with the consular officer, not having the consular officer understand who you are and your motivation, and having an overall confusing stories, having unclear plans, thinking that you have to tell the consular officer about something big that you need to do in your home country, but that there's a lack of genuineness when you communicate that. So advice would be for people that have upcoming interviews would be different than those who are thinking about studying in the United States. So those with upcoming interviews, research your university inside and out. Think about all the unique things that make that university unique. I did a video with UDJ, who's an Indian influencer, and he went to Chico State University. He came from a low income family in India. I think they made like maybe $10,000 a year, but he did his own research. He did his own application. He was able to explain that he's selecting Chico State for some things about the programs, that it's small and that there's not a big Indian community, and he wanted that diversity. But it's not what he said, it's how he said it. He stood out because nobody else had that answer, and there was a genuineness when he communicated. So it doesn't need to be an earth-shattering answer. How you say it and that genuineness is going to shine through. So research your program, and talk about what nuances you like in an authentic way. And then if you can, if this isn't too confusing, I'll try to explain how to really build a great case. And it's to make the consular officer understand you in a holistic way. So I have studied commerce for some time. I decided that I wanted to then go and work in the business space. I decided that without business analytics for a master's degree, I'm not going to be able to build efficiencies for the businesses that I work for. So something that I can learn with business analytics can cut down the time I interpret data from 2 weeks to 2 hours. And so now that I've worked for 2 years, I've realized that, and I want to get my master's in business analytics. I just created a whole concept. I didn't just go there talking about, I'm going for business analytics and to this program because I really like this professor. And that is not giving an idea of who I am. So now the consular officer is following me, and I did it fairly quickly. Yeah.
Sweet. I'm gonna let Paul say something. Paul, do you have something to add to what Yvette, the insights Yvette?
I mean, I don't know very much about. By the way, thanks Yvette for coming. I really appreciate the opportunity to have you on here. I'm currently in Lagos, Nigeria, so if my internet is in and out, then please forgive me. But I was just gonna say, I don't really know much about visas anyways, but I remember like my own visa experience. I came to the US as an international student in 2014. And I remember going to go get my student visa, and it was quite interesting. I was in and out in less than a minute. I was actually, my interview was like less than a minute, and there were 3 questions really that stood out to me. Was the visa officer asked, my program, my school, why I was going to that school, and who was paying for it. So, and it was in 60 seconds I was done. She gave me the paper and you can come pick up your passport in a couple of weeks. And I was like, was that it? So, and so I that was my experience. But when I hear people say, they get denied, in contrast, right? My little sister, she was to the US for school, and very prepared, she was coming for STEM, everything was intact. She went for an interview and she was denied. And I was like, well, I don't understand, why you would be denied your visa where you have everything all set out. And so I think this is really good that we're kind of all learning from Yvette to see what are some of those things that you need to do or be doing, or at least have on your radar to be able to have a successful visa interview process, as compared to those who are not successful in the process. So yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting experience, because my story was kind of similar as well. I mean, I thought it was going to be like a battle. I was going to be there for 10, 15 minutes, but I was out in 3 minutes. I was like, no way. So it feels like that, but it's not a universal experience, because, there are differences in profiles, and sometimes, the visa officer just wants to know more about you, and they want to know more about why they should give you the visa. And so just prepare for the worst, I guess. Prepare for the worst. And so if you happen to be lucky, well, good for you. So Yvette, I'm gonna ask you, so if someone were to go to the consular and get rejected for a visa, how would you advise such a person? Given that they're very sad, and should they just give up, or should they try again?
Well, first, it's not personal, and there's applicants that should try again if they missed communicating some strength of theirs. They can try again. So say you know that you have a very strong application, although it's really hard to determine how the strength of your application. Sometimes people going to Yale ask me if I think their application is strong. Yes, I think your application is strong. So people don't necessarily always know the strength of their application as compared to others. But if you have, some work experience going for a master's, or you have really good grades and high family income going for a bachelor's, there's no exact science. But if you have a strong application, you can try to list out all your strengths and mention those strengths up front, so for example, or be a little bit more prepared. So for example, for Dr. Paul's sister, I might ask, did you have a copy of your brother's, okay, so does she have any family in the United States?
Oh, you mean my sister? Well,
your sister, yeah, it's your sister.
Yeah, I mean, I am in the U.S.
You're in the U.S., right?
And her other brother is, so there, she has another brother in the U.S. And I think these are information that were provided on the DS-160. And I have seen, and this might be another separate question for you. I've seen people being split on the fact that should you mention you have family members in the US, right? Starting from the DS-160, right? But in her case, she heard provided information on the DS-160 about myself and her other brother that we live in the US, what type of what our immigration or resident status were, and all that stuff. So yeah.
Right. So just having her be prepared with copies of your visas if she didn't have that the last time, if she had an incredibly high GPA and she didn't mention that, if she has, internships that she maybe didn't mention, or some intricate projects that would make sense for her master's program, is there ways that she can improve on that? Some students have really strong finances, but start off talking about a loan. Their father could be very wealthy, and they would start off by talking about a loan. Talk about the savings, and then maybe talk about a loan. So it could be as simple as rearranging things. Some students come from high schools that are international schools that cost like $30,000 a year. Some students have their dad is a doctor. There are things that maybe could have been mentioned, or maybe you got promoted multiple times. So there are things that could have been mentioned that students don't necessarily mention. So if your application is strong, and then again, really understanding and creating that overall, this is where I've been, this is where I want to go, and this is how this program is going to help me get there. And then if you've been refused a couple of times, and you maybe have an idea that maybe your university is not as, it's not always about the university, but if you feel like you have a weaker profile, instead of applying again, could you get more work experience? Could you maybe try for a university that's a bit more competitive? It's not about the university, but we're just now talking about those with prior refusals and strengthening the application. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis whether I advise someone, I'm like, okay, no, let's work on your answers and try again, versus like, I really think that you need to do these steps before you're qualified, all the way to, I really don't think you have a chance at this point in your life for this visa. So it really varies what advice I give.
Yeah, that's I guess that's another advice for people not to look one. I mean, it's good to like get other people's experiences about their visa interview and try to shape your own around that. But not necessarily, because what works for someone might not work for you, because unless you're twins or something, you probably come from different backgrounds, have different stories, and probably going to be meeting different visa officers that are going to be looking for different things. So just be yourself. I guess that's like one of the advice I would give. Now, so how much does the visa interview, how much importance should be given to it? Of course, like the application process is like a long process of from DS1s, filling this DS160 form, to the interview process, to the interview itself, to paying the visa fees and all that stuff. And then with all of which culminates in the visa interview itself. So what do you advise people to do when it comes to DS160, filling up the DS160 form, and also, the interview itself?
Right. So for the DS160 forms, don't have long explanations. If you have prior refusal in the explanation box, just put 214B. I think that's the safest option. I would say that if you have any internships or even big projects, or say, in India, there is like a 3-year accounting course, for example, and I noticed some applicants weren't putting that accounting course, maybe because it didn't lead to a degree. Those are all really big things that you can add either in the work experience or education section. So look at the DS160 as your resume. And when you describe your work duties, be succinct and concise. You don't need 3 paragraphs, and you don't need to have like, I did this, I did that, like make it professional. So that the first thing that the consular officer sees is a clean, normal looking DS160. You're not trying to communicate your life on that DS160, just a great snapshot, the best version of you. And don't be afraid, again, to add those internships or projects. And you can mention in the explanation box, project, 3-month project, 3-month internship. And then, yes. So obviously the visa interview is really, important in terms of then communicating all that to the consular officer. It all is based on that verbal communication. And a lot of applicants have this mistake, like, I'm wealthy, I'm just going to bring all my bank documents and I'm going to be fine. And then lo and behold, the consular officer doesn't even look at those documents, and you're not even able to explain that, your dad owns like 6 buildings, and now you have to go home and explain how you failed the visa interview. And that's not where you want to be. So make sure you're able to communicate everything concisely.
A lot of people are divided on as to whether to say they've traveled before when filling the DS160 or not. Is that something that affects the visa decision as a visa officer?
Prior travel is a factor, but that travel also needs to not look like you're just collecting visa stamps. So the consular officer will ask you where you went and what you did, and hopefully you're not just going to a neighboring country to sit in a hotel for 3 days just for the visa stamp. So the consular officer just kind of takes all of that into account. What prior travel really communicates is, I have the funds to travel. That's all that it really communicates. It flags to the consular officer that you at least have some change to, spend some time in Italy for, a few days. So just be prepared. No matter what you put on that DS160 for prior travel, most likely they'll ask you about it. So you want to use that as a strength and not a weakness. So if you say you've been to Italy for a week and then they ask you where you went and you're like, I don't know, I think that there was like some statues around, then the consular officer is like, did you go to Italy? Or what's going on? Or, what did you really do there? So you don't want to make like a strength a weakness, which some applicants sometimes do by not really being prepared for those questions. So that's the only thing I would mention. Travel naturally, travel naturally. So a big piece of advice, especially if you've been prior refused before, and, maybe you want to wait a year before trying again. At that time, try to get a job in your field that relates to the master's degree or an internship. And also, like, no matter where you are, you can go to conferences in other countries. Like, how awesome would it be if you went a year later to the consular officer and they asked you, okay, so what did you do in Ghana, or what did you do in Dubai, or what did you do in Singapore? And you're like, well, there was this like analytics conference. Not only are you, showing a strength to the consular officer, but like to all you students out there, expand your horizon. How are you going to be able to tell if an education agent is good or bad, or advice is good or bad? You expand your horizon. I was an immigrant. I came to the US not speaking English at the age of 9 years old, but I applied for scholarships and went to Washington, DC as a kid on some fellowships and expanded my horizon and talked to people who I didn't have in my neighborhood. And then I was like, oh, I can do this too. And that is what inspired me to become a diplomat. And if I had stayed in my neighborhood and stayed in my bubble and stayed with my friends, then I would have never realized, or been educated of what else is out there. And, so you can kind of kill two birds with one stone with that. Yeah.
Someone would say, well, I'm from a developing country. I haven't even stepped out of Nigeria before. Does that affect my chances with a visa officer?
I mean, if you're not prepared for those questions and you can't explain why you want to step out and go all the way to the US now, and that's what the consular officer is asking themselves. Okay, you haven't stepped out of Nigeria, but why do you want to step out now? Why didn't you step out? So what is that like? And that's very common. Like, even, the best applicants in India and Nigeria have never stepped out. So no, not necessarily an issue because it's just so common. But if you can step out, that would be good. But if you can't step out, then, you really need to get your story together really well.
Awesome. So let me ask you this. So what factors besides, travel and all that, so what other factors do you think these officers consider making decisions? For example, people would say funding, which is like the major one, but we've also seen like people with fully funded scholarships and all that get rejection slips, and that just baffles everybody. Like, what would you say to that person with all of their finances covered, yet they still get rejected at the visa office?
Yeah, I mean, that is really heartbreaking to have a fully funded scholarship, but you still need to talk to the consular officer about why you want to go to that school. I've seen fully funded athletes, especially out of Nigeria and African countries, get denied. I hate seeing that, but at the same time, you got to be more than an athlete too. You got to be able to explain why you're going for that program. So I think that's where it shows that like funding isn't everything, but your plans and why you're doing it is important.
You hit the nail on there, so it's about funding and visa, and I think you mentioned that it's beyond just having finances. Whether you're self-sponsoring or you're being sponsored by university, you still have to kind of prove to the officer that you're not traveling just to run away despite the funding and all that. So besides finances, what other factors comes in play as a visa officer when you try to decide whether to give someone the visa or deny them?
So each consular officer is different. Some would really focus on post-education plans and want to know what you're going to do post-education. The don'ts on post-education is don't just say what you think the consular officer wants to hear. Some don'ts would be, I got a letter from the current company that I work at that says that they're going to hire me back in 2 years. For me, that is not very convincing. I know other consular officers who may think that is, unless you can really talk about, unless that story really makes sense for you, like you are in a leadership position and you want to be at a director level and you can talk about what you're currently doing and why that program is going to help you. It looks like I don't even know if that letter is real. And please don't ever use a fake letter. That would be the worst case scenario. So for some consular officers, they look at post-education plans. The best post-education plans are the ones where you have a fully thought out answer for what you want to do, like say in Nigeria. And this, even though you want OPT or CPT, or maybe you're hoping for an H-1B, you never know what's going to happen in the United States. So just sit down, hang out in your backyard or in your kitchen and write out what you would really want to do with this degree in your home country if you came back to your home country. Like maybe you're like, you can't think past staying in the United States. You're like, I'm going to get married there. I'm never coming. Think past that, right? Like think it's fine. It's and OPT and CPT and H-1B is completely legal to have in your heart. But for the consular officer, I would say have a really solid thing you want to do back in your home country that is believable and is coming from your heart. Think of something, okay? Just think of something. Don't just tell them you want to go back and do this huge, start the next Walmart in Nigeria, or that you're going to go back to your home, that you're going to go back to your company. Because if it was me, I'm like, why don't you just work your way up for your company? Why are you, if that's what you want. So I'm a very common sense officer. I'm like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like if it doesn't make sense to me, like that's not good. I use the criteria, do I feel like this applicant is going to use the visa well? So are they prepared? Can they actually pass their classes? Are they a serious student? And I judge them by how they talk about the academics. And the more passion they have and the more they're able to talk about the academics, that's the bar. I'm like, I don't care what you do in the United States after you finish your program, as long as it's legal. Like, I don't care if an H-1B or getting married is your dream, as long as, is this person going to use the visa well? If I think you're going to use the visa well, then that's what I'm going to judge you on. And so the other thing would be, I ask myself, does this person have something to lose? So that's why master's degrees and STEM programs tend to do better, among other reasons. So if you come to me, like, I had a quick consult with somebody today, and he was going to a community college and he didn't really do anything after secondary school. And he was like 20 years old and he only applied to one program. And he's like, what chances do I have? I'm like, to be honest, I don't think you have any chance. And I'm being honest with you because I don't think you have anything to lose. If you come to me and you're going for a master's program after acing all your BTech classes and working for a couple of years at a company, I think you have something to lose. I don't think you're going to go and work at Dunkin' Donuts or drive an Uber or misuse your visa. So officers like to see that you have something to lose.
Interesting. Go on.
I'll follow up there real quick, Yvette. I think I was gonna actually touch on the STEM versus non-STEM thing. So a lot of times you hear that visa officers have a bias more towards the STEM and the business classes as against the humanities, etc., for international students. So in your experience, right, did you see this, and how true is that? The STEM versus non-STEM, do I stand a better chance at getting my visa approved, or showing a more better profile to a visa officer if I were going to for a STEM or business program? And that's the first question. I know you've touched on my second question in the past in terms of, does it matter if I'm going to a reputable school or not, or if I was going to a community college? How does all of these things kind of stack up, to helping me become successful? So STEM versus non-STEM, reputable versus non-reputable institution.
STEM versus non-STEM. It's fine not to go for STEM. However, with STEM, I know that they'll probably get OPT and STEM OPT. So in my mind, they're going to pay their loans off. And that makes me feel like they're going to use their visa well. So I'm going to talk about myself. So, and and they have something to lose. This guy studied, computer science, wants to study computer science. Do I really think that he's going to blow this F-1 and not study computer science? Like, why would he do that? So for me, that comes into play. The non-STEM programs are tougher because you come to me and you're like, I want to be a nurse. Like, I want to study nursing. Or I'm like, well, are you going to be able to study nursing in Nigeria or India with a US nursing degree? That's one. Two, you're not going to get paid that much in your home country as a nurse, versus STEM programs, you can be a director or go into business, and it really makes a lot more sense. So something like nursing or psychology, or what other non-STEM degrees do I see? Anything, I've seen political science, I've seen law enforcement, and I'm like, but I just don't see the fit here, because it just makes less sense when it's non-STEM. Then the final point about non-STEM, they're easier programs to get into. So the consular officer starts to wonder, okay, like psychology, liberal arts, or you want to go, probably English would be a kind of a terrible thing for Nigeria and India, or like probably speak better English than me. But so again, the ease of it. So those are some considerations for reputable versus non-reputable. Of course, if the school is more competitive, you are proving to me from the get-go that you have the grades to get into this school. Now I just have to worry about fraud. Okay, he got into University of Chicago, he got into Northwestern. I'm talking to him, this seems like an articulate person, I believe he did it on his own. Okay, great, that's a high bar. So that's why the more competitive programs tend to do better at the window. The less competitive programs, I've seen people tell me, I'm going to this school, I've never heard of that school, but I'm going there for gear shifting workshops and mechanical engineering, because this is the only school that has gear shifting workshops, and my dad owns like a manufacturing unit, and I want to go to this school. I'll be like, I don't care what that school is. I don't care if it's a community college. You have explained yourself, sir. And that's what people need to remember. So I've seen people go to less competitive schools over more competitive schools because they have a specific reason that they're doing it. So I can't stress that enough. And if you do get into competitive, and if you want to go to maybe a less competitive school, at least you can apply to more competitive programs and then say, hey, you know what? I got into like this I got into Penn State, but I want to go to, University of Wisconsin, so throw it out there. That's another strength that you can kind of throw out there. So I hope that answered your question on those.
Yeah, I think honestly that's very interesting one that people can benefit from. So I guess non-STEM people are screwed.
Just know why. Be able to explain why you make it make sense. I've had somebody who wanted to run for office and wanted to get a political science degree from the United States. Make it make sense. That was a little bit sketchy, but you're trying, like you're reaching, like you have something like that is new. At least it's normal. And one more point, and I'm like, this really has become a tell-all. I don't even know if I'll have a job after this, but so with education agents, if certain schools in your country, they're like, I want all the Nigerian applicants, I want all the Indian applicants, and they're going hard and they're hiring every single education agent. Then consular officers are like, man, every single person is going to this university. Like, why? And that's a problem. That's why you got to like step out of that mold and be aware. Even reputable schools that are very high ranking, they start to get so many applicants at the visa window. And say some of those applicants are like using fake documents. They don't even speak English. And now they're going to this school that I thought was reputable. And I see 30 other people going to that school. Now I'm questioning like, what is going on with that school? So what you've been seeing a lot of visa denials this year, and there's probably plenty of reasons for it. But the education agents are becoming aware that the oversaturation of certain programs is actually hurting people at the visa window for various reasons. So just be aware of that. So if there's a lot of students that in the United States are going to the specific schools, there's a lot of Nigerians in that institution, and it's not particularly high ranking, you may be at a disadvantage at the visa window. Just another thing to consider. Don't, use that and run with it. Like, I don't want to apply to this school, but just consider it.
So I guess you have to do some background research. Also, try to be aware of what's going on with the visa application generally. And so, what do you think about study loans? So people, they have this feeling that once you show up at the visa window, saying that you've got a loan, the visa officer does not want. They don't even ask you for the questions. They just, give you their slip. These are something you think about when you decide whether to give someone a visa or not, if they are funding themselves or if they got a loan from somewhere to study.
Okay, so there's no one size fit answer here. So we got to be really careful with loans. Loans in themselves are not a bad thing. So I've done some work and have some data around this, that actually if people have loans, it is a good thing and they're more likely to be approved than if they don't have a loan. In general, it's the whole financial picture, so obviously closer relatives are going to be making more sense to the consular officer than your uncle or your friend, right? So the whole financial picture is looked at. So it's okay to have loans, but as a consular officer, your major, your school, your potential for paying off that loan, why you're going to make that investment, all kind of come into play with finances, and your savings, investments, and income also come into play. So it's okay to have loans, but make sure you're giving the whole financial picture, and whether or not like a loan hurts you or doesn't hurt you is not really the question. It's like, does the finances really make sense, and does this investment make sense for this individual is more of the kind of mindset that each individual should think about when they talk about finances. So
awesome. So we're kind of winding up now to the end of the program, but I have a few couple of questions and to ask you. So let's talk about F2. F1 student bringing independence, and very, very recently that's been proving more and more difficult for F1 students that have already been here, but trying to bring their spouses or family over. Is that something you've had to deal with? What do you look at when you see a spouse trying to go meet their student spouse in the US?
F2 is a little bit tricky. It really depends on whether or not I think that F2 is going to use their visa well. That's one thing. Is this F2 going to use their visa well? Does this make sense? Like, if a educated male is going with a female and he's telling me that he's just going to hang out at the house for 2 years, I'm going to have some questions. Or even if it's an educated female going with a male, although culturally that might be a little bit more acceptable, if she can convince me that she really will be a housewife for 2 years, but then still I have some questions. So it really needs to make sense. Some people, they say that I want the F2 just to visit on occasion. In that case, that maybe I'll look at the ties of the F2 and determine whether or not I think, okay, he just wants to go visit for some time. So after that, I look at the finances. Can he or she afford to visit their spouse in the United States for a little bit of time? Or if they're staying for a longer period of time, do they have enough funds to do it without misusing the F2 visa? So again, it goes back to, do I think that this individual will use the F2 visa well? So I've seen a lot of F2 approvals and then, F2 denials. Make sure that you are not going with somebody who you think maybe is not having a truthful story for your F2 with your F1, because then you guys are at risk. So no easy answer for the F2. I know we're rounding out and we've been here for an hour. Maybe we want to do another session with just like Q&A, because I feel like we won't get to a lot of, I don't know how many questions we have, but I'm not sure if we're going to get to a lot of questions. But I mean, I'm happy to come back for another time.
No, that would be that. I'm sure Paul will have something to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we can take some of the questions. Like
Okay.
maybe if you have some time, we can do like
Sure.
some quick
Okay.
round robin
Sure.
and then take some of the
Okay.
questions.
right.
Do you want us to, like take people in from the queue, or would you like us to read out the questions that have already been?
I would say probably read out the questions because when people start to talk, it does take longer.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So I'll go through the questions. I'll start from the very first one. Says, I'm 27. I'm going for my BSc. I was denied twice. I gave up last year after I paid tuition, and I still couldn't get a visa. I'm not sure what the question is there. So I'll assume they're wondering, why they, with everything they've done, why they still are not getting the visa. If you can clarify, Daniel, if you can clarify your questions, that'll be great. So Clinton is asking, what plausible cases that lead to approval of B1, B2? I don't know, Yvette, if you a quick response to that. Although I know this is specifically for
I would
students.
say, yeah, I would say a good purpose of travel and your ability to fund it is like the bottom line on that.
Okay. So I was denied a few weeks ago. This is Favor at Chenajay's asking. I was denied a few weeks ago. The reason the interviewer gave me was that they had exceeded the quota for the particular category F-1 visa for that day. Please, what does that mean? This is the first time I'm hearing like a visa officer would deny a visa that they've exceeded. So maybe you know something about this.
Would never happen. Maybe you misheard them. I'm sorry, but that would the reason that they had exceeded the quota for particular F1 visa for that day. No, we definitely nowhere in the world have a quota for visa approvals.
Sweet, thank you. That'll be my thought process. Faith is asking if they can speak with you about their issue. Yes, we would be reaching out, like everybody who's registered for this, who would like to consult with Yvette. We would be sending some information about how to reach her and work with her. So just feel free to watch out for that email, and we will share information about how to reach out to her and work with her in the future. Okay. What plausible cases must F1 visa with the funding yet to be given by the school in the USA? David, I don't really get your question, David Fripong. So if you can clarify, that'll be great. Princess Victoria, for someone who intends to apply for loans, how do I answer questions on who is sponsoring my education?
So be prepared to discuss the loan, be prepared to discuss how you're going to pay the loan back, and still be able to discuss what your family does. So if there's any support that you can get from your family, that would be helpful in discussing your overall finances, if it's possible. If your mother works and your father works, or you have a brother or sister and you're able to show some support in addition to the loan. Otherwise, you can just talk about the loan and how you're intending on paying it back, and just be prepared for those questions.
Awesome, thank you. So Samuel is asking about the duration of getting his passport back from the agency. I think this probably differs from office to office. So after you get approved for your visa, they say, hey, you can pick it up. I don't know, but do you have any insight as to that?
Getting your visa and passport back, if you applied for an emergency visa interview and the visa is approved, I think it depends on the consulate or embassy, but so it's going to be the regular time that everybody has to wait to get their visa back, unless there is a special provision at the window, which is very rare, which they'll give you your passport that same day. But unless that was communicated, which is again very rare, it's the same time as a normal processing time for your embassy or consulate, which in India is a few days, and in Egypt is 2 weeks sometimes. So it just really depends on your consulate.
Awesome, thank you. So Michael, I think your question is a little bit nuance, so you might want to figure out a time to reach out to Yvette or her team or somebody to help you out here. So we'll skip that. Benjamin is asking, Benjamin, I think Yvette talked about loans earlier, just asking about how loans, having loans affect your chances of getting the visas. And this is an interesting one from Omoyeni, is asking, why do consular officers don't want to hear that you're being sponsored by your uncle? So I don't know if you've come across this. This is a situation you've flagged during your career as a visa officer.
Everybody wonder, do you have an uncle that's willing to pay $100,000 for you to get a degree? That's a really nice uncle. So unless you're serving in a country where uncles are regularly sponsoring, like in India, it's not super far-fetched, but you have to be able to explain it. Like, we live in a joint family. He's like my dad. He is a millionaire. So generally speaking, it's just a little bit hard to convince them that somebody would be willing to front it. However, not impossible, but if you're an excellent student, you have like a perfect GPA and like wealth and fame is on your horizon, and you can convince the consular officer of somebody will be willing to support you. But like, if you have undergraduate grades that are not that great, and your uncle is just an average middle-class guy with his own children, it's a little bit of a hard sell.
I agree. That's the question I'd ask myself if I want to, I have my own family and my immediate needs, and I want to spend $100K on a cousin, a nephew, to go get an education in the US. Maybe if I work with, an oil company or something.
Right.
Okay, so I think you've touched on this. Omojua Abraham is asking, does student with scholarship or sponsorship have a higher chance at getting a student visa?
Yeah, I would say anytime that you have a scholarship or some sort of external funding, especially for merit, it's a positive. I wouldn't say better chance. I would say it's in that positive bucket.
Awesome. So this is an interesting one. I have some opinions here, but Faith is asking, what are the chances of approval after 7 attempts, and what do you advise on how to make the next attempt a good one? So I'm assuming this person is asking, after you've been denied the visa 7 times, I guess they're trying to go the 8th time. So they want to know what your opinions are, what you're thinking about this particular person going back again.
I have never seen somebody with that many refusals ultimately get approved, especially not in a row or recent. So I've never heard a colleague of mine at lunch be like, yeah, the applicant had like 7 refusals, but man, I approved him today. Usually I hear the opposite at the lunch table, where it's like, somebody came with 7 refusals, like, man, they're like really wanting to give the State Department a lot of money. They start calculating like how much money this person has spent. So I think it just looks a little bit like you really want to go to the US. So you never want to look like you're so eager to go to the US that being shut down 7 times is not deterring you. There's a difference between applying again or applying a 3rd time, especially if you change your circumstances, or maybe if you apply again, if you really were nervous in the first interview, versus the 7 denials. I have seen it happen in special cases, like we helped somebody get a visa approval after like a J1 visa. They were going for a residency program. They were denied a bunch of times because the consular officer was really unsure of what they were doing in the US, but they were using their visa well, and we kind of helped them articulate that. But I would say that's like the exception rather than the norm for somebody who has multiple refusals.
Yeah, I would, if I was a visa officer and I see you're coming for the 7th or 8th time, I'll probably lean on precedence, right? But that's just my opinion. so yeah. So what are the best way, tutors asking the best way to show home ties?
So the visa, F-1 visa is adjudicated differently in terms of ties. So if you're going for a B-1, B-2, you're going to be looked at differently than an F-1 visa. The best way to show home ties for an F-1 visa is by showing your strength as an F-1 applicant. With that being said, you know, especially if your parents have really stable jobs, if you have immovable assets in your family, those are going to strengthen your ties. But just by being a strong applicant, you know, working in your home country, you know, getting that bachelor's degree from your home country, you're showing those ties, like you have something to lose. So just to compare it with the 20-year-old that, you know, just finished high school, didn't really do anything for a couple years and wanted to go to the United States, they don't have a lot to lose. So again, even if they have their entire family there, they're still showing weak ties because they haven't proven anything yet. So for a bachelor's candidate, you can still show home ties, but that's going to come with your families able to finance it. So for a bachelor's degree student, those finances are going to come into play 4 versus 2 years and the strength of that university. So when you go into a strong university and have strong finances, you're showing your ties because you have something you can go back to and be successful in back in your home country because you've proven, hey, I've gotten good grades to get enough to go in this university in the United States. Does that make sense? I know that I kind of muddied that up a little bit.
No, it does. And I think the final question, after which, you know, you can elaborate on, you know, more about your work and how people can, you know, reach out to you if they need to, you know, to get support from you. And we're going to provide all of that information as well as a follow-up. The final question is, like, what's your take on, I'm from Nigeria and I'm going for my visa interview, say in Ghana or in Kenya, or even I've heard people go all the way to, like, maybe they have like a UK visa or like they have like a, you know, South Africa visa and they go over there to, you know, for their interview. What's your take on that?
If you've had a prior refusal, in general, it's riskier to go to another country because you've already been adjudicated by an officer in your home country who understands your culture a lot better, because they work in that environment. So if you go to another country, they're going to see, okay, an officer who works in Nigeria has determined this person is not qualified. They know the school system in Nigeria. They know how secondary school works in Nigeria. And how can I, as an officer in Singapore, prompt them? However, but if it's a fresh application and you cannot get appointments in your home country, it's a little bit of a stronger case. You go up to that officer in Singapore. I couldn't get an appointment in Nigeria until 2025. My start date is in a month. So you can, you know, be upfront about that. It's a fresh application. You have a little bit of more wiggle room. So I would be aware of these two dynamics. In general, you know, staying in your home country is going to be a safer bet.
Sweet, thanks, Yvette. That's really amazing. I mean, I would like for you to share, you know, any last words and, you know, share with, you know, the group, the audience, how to, you know, what services, you know, Udeti offers and how to take advantage of those and reach out to you or your team. And we would also follow up with those information. And then, you know, we can hand over back to our moderator to, you know, help wrap it up. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think if you have a really strong case, we have our YouTube channel, which I would love for you to follow, Udeti Visa, where we have more videos, and we have a free blog. So you feel like you can lace up and communicate on your own, and this was great advice, then great. I don't want you to spend your money if you don't have to. If you feel like you have a prior refusal, really need the extra help, I have a consular officer who's worked in Nigeria, and we are available for you. I'm going to give you our WhatsApp number and a 15% discount that you can apply on udetivisa.com. It would be an honor to help you guys through your application. You know, always be a critical thinker. Never take things at face value. Go outside your circle. Go outside your world. Expand your horizon. Believe in yourself. That's the last thing I want to tell you. Like, don't spend your time proving to the world anything if you don't even believe and love yourself. So believe in yourself, love yourself, respect yourself. That's all that matters. Everything else will be like water off a duck's back for you if you keep that in mind. I've been there, I've struggled, so you can do it. You can like overcome challenges in life. We all face them, even if there's, it doesn't seem like we all face them, we all do. So, don't get down on yourself. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Your story is very inspiring, and it strikes me when you said you came to the US at the age of 9 and you weren't even speaking. You couldn't speak a word of English, but here you are giving visas to people who are trying to immigrate to the US as well, and have a better life. And I'm sure most of us would have learned something about that like where you are today does not necessarily define you. Just keep taking the steps to improve yourself, and maybe one day you're going to be sitting behind the visa window like Yvette and assessing applicants. So I'm going to try to close with one question. So Yvette, you're a visa applicant, and a visa officer asks you, why USA? Why USA? How would you answer that?
I would pivot into your university. So again, going into your university and why you selected your university. So I'm a commerce student. I have 2 years of experience. I want to get business analytics, and the best business analytics program is this university. So you can always like pivot back. If you've considered other countries, you can say that. I've applied to the UK, I've gotten into universities in Canada, but this business analytics program really has that leadership nexus, or really want to be exposed. In addition to what I want to be exposed to with this business analytics program, I want to be, and you can just add something very small like that technology or that diversity. So it doesn't have to be a big long answer about why the US. It can go back to who you are and why this program makes sense for you, because you have a very limited time with the consular officer. So don't waste it kind of talking about, the location of the US or, fluffy things. Like go back to being about business and who you are. So that's my advice. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Thank you, Paul, for your experiences as well. And thank you, Pay for me actually for this wonderful session. I'm sure you've elevated some spirits today, and maybe some people might be getting the visa accepted because of this program. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Maybe some other time I'm gonna bring Yvette and she's gonna talk more. There's definitely more where that came from. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us. I'll see you guys some other time. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Yvette. Yeah.
Thank you,
guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.